of one negative, if it is a negative to bore cut, and that is understanding reactive forces of where to use the tip, just the reactions of the saw. If you understand that, there's no negatives. There's only positives.
So I've got a treat for y'all. Probably a lot of y'all probably recognize this fella right here. This is Mr. Tim Ard. Right here, just kind of next door in Rome, Georgia is where you live.
Not far away.
Not far away. We happen to be back in Kingston again. But for those of y'all who don't know, just kind of give us a little brief thing. And I'm going to say this right here. Mr. Tim has made his entire life pretty much off of making saw chips and training people. He is trained, now y'all check this out, more than 70,000 people on chainsaws.
Well, I started this because I didn't have anything else to do.
Got hungry, huh?
That's it. No, I started off on the workbench, and then working around the country with service schools and things like that, and then basically became involved with Soren Eriksson, and Soren started to teach me, and I helped with some of the saw stuff for him, and he started to teach me how to run the saws and to put together plans and to manage the work. And so we started sharing the information.
Soren Eriksson is the one who developed the bore saw method that y'all see me use a lot in my videos, and we're going to get more into that as we go. And Soren and Mr. Tim developed the game of logging. Those of y'all who have been around for a while, the colleges and stuff like that used to compete all the time on the game of logging. We're going to get into a lot of history today. We're going to run chainsaws and play with them, so y'all just stay tuned. That's a good firewood tree right there. What did the diameter on it end up being when you measured it just then?
About 26.
26, okay.
Maybe 27.
So he's going to...
DBH is less.
Yeah.
About 25.
So he's going to cut this one with a 562 XP, and he's going to bore saw it.
Down through there about where that little twig is, just in between the dogwood and the cedar.
There you go.
And
I'm going to get points for style.
in this case we got a little bit of Widowmaker hanging up there, but every tree's got dead stuff in it. But on this one, it's not too bad. Everything's forward anyway. But it's got to watch this limb throwing pine tops or breaking off the dead stuff. But looking at this, I've definitely got forward lean of probably 6-7 feet, so it's no problem there. Sidewise, we've got limbs over here and limbs over here. But if we're going down to this area, it's basically straight side to side from here. This side over here with throwback potential, I probably will release and escape back over into this. So first of all, we look for hazards and obstacles. Second is we look at the lean side to side, forward to back, and you got to put yourself in a position for that. Third is where your escape's going to be. Fourth is how much hinge. This one's about 25, 26 inch tree, something like that. So I'm going to say probably 2-inch thick hinge. And it's fairly flat on the front side. It's just at height, there's no reason to go real low on it. I don't guess you're going to sell this, are you?
No, no, it's going to be burned in a fire pit up there.
So basically we'll cut a little bit higher and
make it easy on the back, yeah.
And then I don't know how rotted the stump is on it anyway. So, but anyhow, we'll put face notch in on this one. You know, we try to get it to hold as much as possible. I don't know what the fiber is going to be. We'll know a little bit better when we get the face notch in it. But probably a little bit open face of at least 70 degrees, but open up a little bit more of the bottom. I usually try to put the bottom at the same angle as the terrain if at all possible.
Correct.
And that keeps it from closing.
It allows that hinge to work all the way to the ground. So
I imagine it's not going to hold very long with this one.
So if the ground was flat right here, we would be fine with a 70 degree on the top. But since we're going to nosedive off this hill right here, we've got to allow some relief on the bottom, kind of like a Humboldt would be, you know, on the bottom right there, to allow that tree to go all the way over and keep that hinge intact, because that's the name of the game, is keeping the hinge from tearing and ripping.
And, you know, the difference, a lot of people use a standard common notch. And basically, if I've got 45 degrees, it's going to move 45 degrees before the face notch closes. At that time, my hinge gives up. In this case, I could pivot that forward a little bit, turn it into a Humboldt, and still only get 45 degree movement.
Correct.
But if I open this up to 70 degrees or more, that reduces chances of butt rebound. And also, I bring it over, so let's say 90 degrees like this. A big effect of a Humboldt with a larger tree is the butt tends to break and slide off instead of holding the top down first. So if you're looking at selling the timber, you know, you don't want it shattered.
Correct.
So cutting poles or something like that, you try to, especially bigger ones, the bottom effect coming up also tends to sit the log down first before the top hits. And so it keeps it from shattering in some cases. But a lot of people don't understand how the notch actually works. And you have to have a notch for a hinge to work, but you also have to have a hinge for a notch to work.
There's a method to the madness, and I actually have 2x4s in my class. I have them cut at different degrees, and I have them laying on the table straight up like it's mimicking a tree. And then we move it to where it's going to close to see where the hinge is going to tear. And just like he said, this tree right here is not going to be cut for any kind of selling potential or anything like that. So we're not going to cut this tree low. And anytime you're doing tree takedown work, make it easy on yourself. Cut it off up waist high, and then cut the stump. If you want to take the stump on down, then you can come back and cut the stump on down, because it's a lot easier to cut it off up at your hips rather than on the ground like that. And
if something dead too, instead of bending way over, it gives me my hard hat protection.
Yeah, you're straight up and down like a stem instead of laid over like that, where you've got more area for something to land on. Because that helmet right there, it's rounded for a purpose. It'll hit it, a lot of times it'll glance off of it, and it can take a pretty big lick from something coming out even of a dead tree like this, and it may knock you silly, but it won't kill you, you know. So all good information, Mr. Tim.
And so the last thing is how I'm going to cut it. So I'm going to put my face notch in and pretty much aim it on that opening. And the bad side on this one, like I said, it's almost straight. Probably have a little bit more weight to this side, but I've got counterbalance to that side. I'm gonna call this my bad side over here. Plus, I've got, it looks to be some conchs and mushrooms on the side over here. So I'm gonna say it's probably a little bit more rotted on that side. So I'm gonna do that side first. That'd be what I call my bad side.
Correct.
Not really a good side or a bad side, but you know, it's probably two bad sides. But I'm gonna call that my bad side. I'm gonna cut the bad side first, and then finish on the good side. And in this case, I'm going to use a bore cut. I'm going to bore in, set up my 2-inch hinge, and then I'm going to cut back out. I'm going to come over here, bore in, set up my 2-inch hinge, cut back. I'll release the back off of it and walk away to my escape over here.
Tell us, explain to us about the bore cut and the reason why, the theory and the reason why behind the bore cut.
A bore cut is basically, some people call it plunge cut, some people call it bore cut, but it's using the tip of the bar.
Sure.
So let's take in this case right here. With this particular tree, I could do half and half cutting from the back, or I'd have to have a larger bar and cut everything from the back to keep it from possibly splitting or going before I'm ready to, because all the weight's forward. So here in this case, I set the hinge up first.
That's it right there.
That's a barber chair.
That's what I wanted you to say first. You set the hinge. The hinge is done.
The hinge is done. Your steering is done. Everything. All you're doing now is releasing the tree.
The foundation is made for it.
This one's forward, so it's going that way. If it were back lean, it gives me a spot to put a wedge.
Sure.
I also, with a bore cut, know what the center of the tree looks like. Is it hollow? Is it rotted? So I know that I've got good hinge material.
Yeah, you're not finding that out as you're cutting too, trying to make your hinge, and then you're like, oh no, because you can feel it in the saw.
And I guess what I always tell people is, I only know of one negative if it is a negative to bore cut, and that is understanding the reactive forces of where to use the tip, just the reactions of the saw. If you understand that, there's no negatives. There's only positives.
Right.
Because you think about, I know if it's hollow or not. I can keep a heavy forward leaner from barber chairing. If I had a storm damaged tree and it has a limb or a vine up there, it gives me more release time. It gives me more escape time.
Right.
If I think about a back leaning tree, it gives me a spot to put a wedge. I can take a smaller. A lot of people have trouble with, say, 12, 14-inch trees. With back lean, you got to put a line in it. Well, if I have an obstacle like a house or something, or a fence line, yeah, I'm probably going to use a line. But if not, it gives me, with a bore cut, the ability to put a wedge into a 10-inch tree.
That's correct.
Sometimes.
Correct.
And so now I can jack a tree over by setting the hinge up first, making the slot through it, place my wedge, cut the strap off, drive the wedge.
Right.
If I have a situation too, of a piece of equipment, I can set this tree up. Like if I want to make sure that equipment's going to launch it for me, and basically I can set it up with a small strap in the back. The equipment can push it. I can be back over there.
In a safe place.
You really don't want somebody pulling on a tree like this, if it were straight or back lean, with a rope or a cable, because down here cutting, but I can set it up with a wedge, with a bore cut, and be out of the way and say pull the rope or push with the machine or whatever. So it gives you a lot of safety.
Because tell us the statistics on people getting killed right here or injured at the stump. What's the percentage of it right here until you get out to 16 foot away from it?
Well, some of the statistics have actually gotten better. Canada's got some new things printed out as far as feet away. But for years, it's pretty much been 80% of the struck by fatalities, serious injuries are within a 15-foot circle around the stump.
That's it.
That's where stuff comes back to, falls down to. So basically, you want to be back 16 feet or more. It's just that simple.
Because if you break that hinge, the gravity, the top is going to try to seek that stump then.
Right. It's kind of unique. People don't think about that, but when this tree starts to fall, the center weight, it tries to find, I got a little more, it tries to find its attachment point.
That's right.
So it automatically tries to come back.
That's right.
And same thing if you cut a limb off a tree, it's going to usually come backwards. So it's something to think about how that works.
Very interesting. Well, we finna fire it up. We're gonna cut this dude down here.
I've got a good sharp saw here, I hope.
I looked at that chain. I'm not so sure how sharp that thing is right there.
I think I saw this one on a video though. It was cutting pretty good.
Yeah, we're gonna find out. It may be as sharp. We'll find out when you stick it in. We'll if it's not sharp, we're gonna do some hee-hawing on somebody back here behind us. All right, let's talk about this one a little bit now. We've got a whole different ball game on our hands now with this dude.
Yeah, I could tell once I started in there.
You could feel it. So we have definitely got a very hollow tree here.
But I still have.
You still got plenty of meat though.
Hinge here. And it looks solid on those two sides. So bore in just as planned.
Still going to treat it the exact same way as it was if it was a solid tree, because we can work with that right there. Y'all see how he kind of come up from the bottom to give it some more relief right there on the bottom cut where to pivot on over some more.
The notch that I've taken out here, probably 85 degrees.
Yeah.
I've got a little bit of downward on the bottom to follow the terrain. And more or less, flare wise, we could take it lower if I wanted to stay completely out of the cylinder. But it's not really too much in the waning.
And that's still good meat right there. It's still got a lot of moisture in it. And that's the thing about cutting trees also. You kind of got to know what you're dealing with, the fiber that's in the wood that you're fooling with, because they're all different. The oaks are different than the pines, and the fast growth stuff that we've got in Mississippi, Alabama, the southeast right here. It's a very different animal to cut. I mean, you can cut the hinge down on them things to, to way less than 10%, and they still don't want to fall. I mean, they're like they got rebar in them or something. So you kind of got to know what you're dealing with, what kind of tree, the fiber that's in it that you're cutting to. Know what you got to work with. But that looks good.
Another thing, quality wise, we always used to put some little cuts on the outside of the hinge.
Yeah, to keep it from tearing.
I've done them different ways. You can do just angled down and logging. That's usually what we did. With tree care, sometimes those hinge areas can cause peels down the side, which could catch lanyards or rigging.
Right.
So in some of those cases, we've taken just cut in on the side a little bit below it. That way you had a pin in here, but it cut off that last 4 or 5 years of growth. In this case, I probably just put a little slide down on it just to keep it from peeling on the edges.
That's right.
But also so you can see it a little better.
You're looking for kind of two rules of thumbs. You're looking for 80% of the diameter DBH or a third. You know, we're in there at 80%.
If it's a perfectly round tree, it's about a third.
That's right. It'd be about a third.
But if you think about it, if you change directions, and a lot of people ask about that, you know, if you look at this tree, you've got a build up on the front side, it's flat on the back. So if we were actually going in the other direction, you'd have a flat. If you look over here, it's flat. You don't have to go in a third to be able to get 100% of the diameter.
Correct. That's right. And the strength of your tree is out here in the sapwood on it anyhow. You get up there in the heart part of it,
in this
it's
case,
not
definitely.
as strong. Yeah, we don't have a heart right here on this one or anything. We got a shell right here. So we're doing David's dirty work.
I think the landowner owner gave us a bump.
He gave us he knew what he was doing. He was sitting in there and he had it lined up. Look at him, he knows.
You never, when you go to these things, you never get the best trees on the property. They always ask you to take down the dead ones.
The ones covered with poison ivy usually too.
That's what they've always done to me, so I'm just returning the favor.
Oh, well, you got it aimed good too. I mean, it's right in that hole where you want it to
So
be.
the line on the saw, horizontal or I usually go back to the original side, but if you look down that line, it should be right on that little twig. Is it close?
Yes, it's right there on it. I mean, right
Little
there.
to the left, to the right.
A little to the right. Yeah. You talking about that little twig right there, the little cedar twig?
Yeah.
Yep. And of course, that's going to put it. You got to keep in mind, you know, saw sitting over this way a little bit, so it's going to put that when you lean it over. The tree's going to be right in line with that twig right there.
Kind of a trajectory at 50 foot out there anyway, but
right.
if this one holds, it'll be a miracle.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, that right there is going to fare pretty quick.
So now if I start from the back, and another thing with a tree like this, you get into, I call it flutes, where you've got cracks or breaks. And a lot of time with storm damage that's horizontal, you'll see how those show up when you're bucking stuff up. But here, if I just start cutting from the back, I still have a chance of it splitting up.
That's right.
With a bore cut, as long as I have good enough material here to handle the weight downward, I come in here, cut out, come in there, cut out. It's no different than cutting a solid tree.
And on a dead tree like this too, one that's dead, if you want to be a little bit more safe about it, you can run, you know, 10% hinge. You can actually get up 15% of a hinge, or go a little bit more than 15. It's still going to work. Still going to, you know, you can kind of lay a little insurance in there with it if you want to. You know,
more than 10 will usually cause pulling or cracking.
Right.
10 or less in most species, and it's not really. I always tell people it's not the type of tree, and I've proven that many times. It's not the type of tree. It's that particular tree.
Correct.
You get into an area where you got a bunch of oaks that are rotting out, they'll pretty much all act the same right here, but you take this oak and go over the hill, it'll act completely different. So your information is about this tree.
Right. It's what you're dealing with right now at this point in time.
Yeah. So I'm going to level up to this face notch, come in here, come up to 2 inches, cut pretty much out the back.
We'll talk about that too right quick. On a 70 degree or greater notch right here, which is what you got. You can bore in at your apex right there at the same level of it, because you're going to make your hinge. If you were cutting, if you were doing it different, Riley, what are you doing? If you were doing it different, then you would come up to where you would keep a stump from it, doing a stump shot on it.
Less than 70, a stump shot is required.
Right.
And that's basically, and you know, I always tell people, unless in about a 4-foot diameter tree, I don't really see stump shot doing a whole lot. But when you get down into smaller stuff, definitely a stump shot, if you're going to use less than 70 degrees, is an important thing, because you want to have something that kind of locks that backward movement we just talked about from coming back off. But I will say this: if you've got hinge material, that's your best safeguard.
That's right. And so you can line. A lot of people don't. They ask me about that. They don't understand that. But the way that notch is set up, 70 degrees or greater, you can lay your bore into it right there at your apex, the same level as your apex. You don't have to. You can get up above it if you want to, but you can go in level with it.
And the reason for that is the angle of the fiber, like it's growing down into this root. The only place you know what hinge you have is perfectly level to the apex of the notch.
Right.
If you come up or go down, it's either going to add or take away.
Right.
So if you need to be particular with your hinge to get the holding and the steering, then the only place you can be accurate is dead even.
That's textbook right there. Look at that. Very nice. And look at there's your stem right there. It dead centered, that dude. Reckon how many trees you've cut in your life, Mr. Tim?
Not as many as I've watched people cut. But you know, the neat thing I think about having a plan together in your head is that you can come back, reevaluate, see what worked and what didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so we wanted a 2-inch hinge. So let's look at what we got here now. So here, I'm a little bit shy.
Mm-hmm. This one
as
right
far
here
as fiber. I stopped here, and I've been right at 2.
Mm-hmm.
Over here, I've got a little over 2.
Mm-hmm.
And look what it started to do.
That's right.
It started to crack.
I was going to point that out right there.
The small one, the thinner one, actually held that tree better than the thick one.
That's right.
Because you see the hinge breaks from the back to the front. So a perfect hinge on this tree would have probably been about 1 inch, 1.25 inches.
Right.
So just a little thinner than what we had here would have been perfect. And a lot of people say, well, you didn't cut it flat. I probably should have, especially if I was selling the log. But the other thing is that it really doesn't make any difference because this fiber is vertical.
That's right.
Putting together a plan on a horizontal tree, something that's down for storm damage or disaster groups or city, county, a tree that's down is probably 10 times more dangerous to me than felling a tree.
And storm work, it's like, I equate it like to trying to diffuse a bomb, basically, is what you're doing. You're taking guys and trying to diffuse a bomb that's trying to kill you every second that you stick a saw into that thing.
And it's something to where it goes back to a plan. It's a very intricate plan, very intricate. In other words, you're going to look at this and you say, can it go side to side where I cut it?
Mm-hmm.
Then you look at it and you say, when I cut it, is it going to go up or is it going to go down?
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at it and you say, could there be back pressures?
Mm-hmm.
And then the last is, what kind of cut do I need to make to be able to control this?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you start to look, and I had some guys share with me years ago a little rule of thumb. First of all, one person on a tree with a chainsaw until it's stabilized.
Right.
Okay, that might be that one person cuts in 2 or 3 places, and you might have somebody working here and somebody working down there in the crown. Second is, try to start from the butt end whenever possible. You know, if you've got a storm tree that's wind thrown,
right,
the closer you go to the root ball, when you cut it, most likely it's going to stand back up.
Mm-hmm.
It creates an amazing sometimes, especially in situations like this, how it can hold that thing up. Especially at the end if you've got stuff side to side of the tree that could cause pressures in bind sideways. So you go as close as you can to disconnect it from the stump first, because you don't know if that's going to hold. Then you start working up and you're looking every cut you make, side to side, up and down, back and forward, and how can I control it? And it's just that simple, but it takes a plan on every single cut, because you start on the butt end and work this way, you're always in the clear. Mm-hmm. If I go out there and the crown is high, it can roll on me. And so if I got 2 people that's working, it can roll because they cut something loose that's holding. What creates pressure in the top is the trunk, the weight of the trunk, the logs. So always try to work from this end, and that's not on every tree. A lot of times I can go out like this one. It really doesn't make a whole lot of difference where you
Sure, it just depends on the situation.
It depends on the situation.
What you're dealing with.
And then the last thing is, don't pass any limbs. Because what happens is if you pass a limb and you go out farther, you know, then basically that becomes a pivot or pressure. And if you notice, this tree's not, because it's all falling apart, but if you got a green tree, that limb goes out, what's it trying to do right there? It's supporting weight on the limb,
mm-hmm.
but it's pushing to the right.
Mm-hmm.
If it goes out that side. If it's stuck straight in the ground, it's a pivot.
That's right.
If I take that off as I go, I create my own movements.
Mm-hmm.
But if I leave it, it could roll and get me, or it could cause pressure that I can't manage with the next cut. And I can choose to make small blocks. I can choose to take 10-foot logs, 20-foot logs, whatever I need. I try never to cut above my shoulders with a saw. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I will, but I've got the saw like this. I never go to this position because there's no way that you can stop the reaction.
It's overpowering.
So you turn this way, you can support a lot of weight and be able to cut pretty high.
And if it kicks, it's going to kick laterally beside you.
Right. Here in this case, it's nice to have a longer bar because you don't have to swap sides so much. But the same theory, I can cut bad side and then good side. Which would be my bad side on this one, you think? I look for braces.
Mm-hmm.
So it can't really roll this way. So if I take 6 feet off right here, it can't come this way.
Correct.
It's going to go down. I have somewhat of an escape, but I will say this. With a horizontal tree, you don't have an escape. You got to have your tail in the right spot before you cut. And you know, I watch a lot of videos, and if you're cutting on that side and you got a tree up over there, that's a great block, just like that is.
Yep.
But if you don't have the block, it's hard to get away from it. So every cut. And so how can I control this one? Where's my compression and tension of those movements? In this case, I'm on the ground here, I'm on the ground down there. So in between this spot and that spot, what's it going to do? Come up or go down?
Gonna go down.
Now, if I still have root ball, it might come up.
That's right.
But I don't have root ball, so it's going to go down. So how can I cut it? I want to cut the compression side first and then the tension side. So basically, I have a choice. And I use a rule of thumb on this. If I can jump over it, I might use a straight cut or a wedge cut or an offset cut.
Mm-hmm.
But if I can't jump over it, I'm going to use a notch and a hinge, just like I felled the tree. So in this case, I want to put a notch in the top. I can bore through the middle, set up a hinge, cut down, and allow the tree, once it's on the ground, then I can cut my hinge off from the top with an offset, move down to my next block. Let's see if that notch and hinge will work on this with a bore cut. I don't have to touch any switches.
Nope.
And I don't have to have a huge notch. Having to cut up, I can bore through and cut down. And I could use just an offset, but again, it's up above the ground. But I'm gonna use a hinge again. So that's actually severed right there. We get David to do a flying drop kick.
Yeah. Break it.
It'll come right apart.
I think.
Now I've got compression on the bottom, possibly. May go down a little bit more. I'm going to use an offset there, and if I have to, I'll reverse. And that one's broken. I probably would cut that one off first. But I'll just show you right here. I can use what we call tongue and groove. So that's a bore cut through.
Right.
Offset, offset. As long as you bypass. I don't think I've got the other side bypass.
It's cut, it just don't know it.
Yeah, it is. So it's all right here. I have a tongue going into a groove joint.
Right.
So you can't twist.
All right, so I'm sitting here with Mr. Tim Ard. How many years have you been doing this total now?
Well, I started off working on them in 1976.
76.
And then started doing some service schools and stuff in 81. But I had to shop from 78 to 81. And then after that, like Soren and I, he started teaching me and stuff. It was about, I think, 84 or something like that.
You've based mainly your whole career now on training, saw training.
That's it.
And been very successful at it. You said you've been in 47 of the 50 states training. Do a lot, primarily municipalities, stuff like that, cities and
well, most of that travel was on the logging side of it about years ago, but
sure.
Then with logging, it went on until 2000 really, and then after that, it you know, kind of went to the tree care stuff, and then about 2004, something like that, we really started with the city and county and the disaster cleanup groups.
You worked with Soren for a long time, and basically in Sweden, he's almost like a god, almost. You know, what was that like, being able to work with him? And did you ever really realize, like, when he started kind of teaching you things, the magnitude of who he was then at that time? And
yeah, back in '89, we were able to go on a, Soren kind of hosted it, going to Sweden and Finland, going to the logging consulates and all. And when we got over there, I went to all the several forestry schools in the state, country offices, and he was treated like a celebrity.
Yeah, he was.
And you get over there and you start meeting the people with the major paper and pulp companies and stuff, and you know, most of it was paper and pulp. And you get over there, and I was in Soren's class. and this was like 20 years ago then, you know. So when he really was strong with Nordfor was. You know, they had 18 different instructors around the world, and then they sold out to Electrolux, and he came to the States shortly after that. But yeah, he's, and even in the States, a lot of guys like Steve Conway with Scott Paper and stuff. We were sitting at a picnic table like this on the Tom Bigby Waterway, and I asked him, I said, you know, why do you spend so much on training with Soren? And he said, well. And he was president of Scott Paper at the time. He told me, he said, well, Tim, he said, you know, we get accountants and managers to come in, and we spend thousands and thousands of dollars, and it might be 10 years before we reap all of it. He said, when Soren goes to one of my sites and walks away, I make my money back overnight. And you know, you start thinking about it. And one other interesting story, we were with Scott, and there was a whole field that had been cut, and it had been cut for probably 3 or 4 months, so the stumps had washed away, you know. So the high stumps were up there, and he wanted a program for about $37,000 he had presented to Scott for this one area, and he said, I can't. The manager, he said, I can't afford that, Soren. And he said, yeah, but you know, we could work and be able to increase your production and maintain the safety. Soren, we can't. And he said, well, Mr. Kelly, can I show you something? And he said, Tim, where's my saw? I went and got the saw. He grabbed the saw like this, walked over to a stump, bored into it, cut around like this, picked up about a 50-pound chunk of wood, went over and handed it to Mr. Kelly. He said, Mr. Kelly, how much does that weigh? And he said, I don't know, 40, 50 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
He said, how many of those do you see out here? How do you sell your wood?
Right.
And he said, you know, we sell about a ton. I said, how many tons do you think is out here if we take another 6 inches off of that?
Right.
And immediately one of the guys was standing there beside him. He said, what's the stumpage on this place? And he calculated it up, and it was $38,000 he would save by 6 inches lower on the stump.
The rule of thumb is 80% of a tree's value is in the first 16 foot. So the lower that you can cut that thing down till you get to the root swell down there, the more money you make as a logger, as somebody selling timber. A lot of people don't realize that. You take 6 inches over a day, a week, a month, over a year, it adds up astronomically all the time. And I remember there's been times where we've cut mark sales and actually get in trouble because we would cut, the guys that marked it didn't do a good job getting the paint all the way down on the ground, and we would end up going below the paint on some of the trees, you know, and so it's interesting. That's something that you know, I want to mention too. You've seen a lot of change over the years, hadn't you? Because when you came in and when you started all the stuff that you were doing, chainsaws were the way to cut trees now. I mean, everybody ran them. I mean, thousands upon thousands of chainsaws ran across this entire United States. It's evolved a lot, hadn't it? Kind of talk about that a little bit.
Well, I was involved in a couple of the first certification programs in different states, and one of them, West Virginia, they had lined up, they wanted to train with kind of just demonstration, but training, they called it, about 4,800 to 5,800 people. And I called up, they were asking about, you know, what do we need to do on personal protective equipment and stuff. And I checked with 3 different manufacturers at that time. I had a S10 Blazer. And I called up these 3 manufacturers. I said, can you give me what you sold into West Virginia over the past year? 86 pairs I came up with of chaps.
86 pairs.
I could carry everything that went to the state of West Virginia.
In your Blazer.
In the Blazer.
In your Blazer.
And you know, it was a lot of people were saying, you know, getting all the regulations and all this kind of stuff. But I got involved with the OSHA program up there. They had 12 fatalities in 1 year in the logging community. And you start meeting these people and you find out, like yourself, hard workers, dirt people that work their bones off, you know, to make a living with their families. And they do something for our economy, they do something for our ecology, and you get to know these people, and 12 of them out of a picture of a small group like logging is serious. So OSHA stepped in and they wanted to do the training, and we took it to 0 for the next 2 years. And going back to what we talked about there with you know, training is not just on the handles of the saw. It's looking at the whole marketing, the whole growth process, the weather, the, you know, everything that applies to it. That's where training comes in.
What gets me too is I keep up with a lot of social media stuff, and you and I are on the in the trenches, so to speak, teaching safety. You're hired to teach people how to run saws, how to do it safely, how to fail, how to work trees up or laying on the ground and things. But I see hundreds of videos every year that I run across, either on Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, or anything like that, and it blows me away, the people who are not, no protective PPE stuff at all, no hard hat, no hearing protection, glasses, face protection, chaps, anything. And I use a lot of those videos, I save them, and I use them in my training. I say, this is what this tree does. If you cut it slap off the stump, watch what it does coming at this guy. Watch this guy that's standing right there within 3 foot of that tree. The tree's got a big bow in it, and when it hits the ground, he's standing there watching the top of it, and he didn't even realize that tree rolled, and it came up and almost pile driving him in the ground. And that kills me. It's crazy that even today in 2020, there's still a lot of guys that lose their lives out there running saws. I mean, I hear about it all the time, you know. And so I want to talk about your training company that you got. What's the name of your
Forest Applications Training Incorporated.
Forest
Applications
Training Incorporated. And you've had that for how long now?
I incorporated that in 1992, January of 1992.
Been around for a long time then if that's been incorporated. You said you have trained approximately over 70,000 people over the years?
Averaged about 2,500, 2,700 a year.
A year? Mm-hmm. And so if you're a municipality, and that's the reason why I've got Mr. Tim in front of the cameras right now, and you need saw training, especially the coastline down there, storms come through. I mean, they had the high winds up in the Midwest this year, just tore up everything up there. I'm sure they were running saws up there a lot. How can they look you up to get to you? Because you travel everywhere to train. Yeah. So, I mean, because that's what you do for a living. How can they look you up and get hold of you?
You just Google Tim Ard, it'll come up.
Just Google Tim Ard, T-I-M-A-R-D, and it'll come up. Got to work with steel, worked for them for a while. You were working small engine mechanic, and then you worked for Husqvarna for quite a few years. Got a lot of history with them. You've seen chainsaws change a lot too over the years, haven't you?
Yeah, yeah.
And now we're really beginning to see the chainsaws have evolved, but we're really beginning to see the cutting systems out there on the end of them to change. And somebody's been with you a long time. Oregon's been with you a long time, right? Hadn't they?
They were one of our first sponsors for game of logging.
Yeah, Oregon cutting systems, bars, chains, all that stuff, files, everything. They've
harvesting
been
systems.
Harvesting systems. They have been on your side for a long time, haven't they? And you've done a lot of work with them, a lot of research type stuff, testing stuff, and all. So goes back. But again, who would think that you could make a living like you and I do every day making saw chips?
It's a pleasure,
and it's good, ain't it? I mean,
it's I think they say the second oldest profession in the world.
Right.
But it's something, and Soren was teaching me this when we started the training, of talking about competition in the training, and that's always challenged me. And if you go back to the old logging camps,
right,
the older guys, they trained the younger guys with competition. They worked like crazy, and the young guys that were learning apprenticeship programs would take, and they would carry gas, or they would carry axes or saws or whatever. On the weekends, they'd come back to camp, and they competed with the old guys, and that's how they learned. They didn't do it necessarily during production days. They did it on the off time or separate training days, and that's how they kept things going, and the increase in production and maintaining safety.
I'm a firm believer in constantly learning. I never claim to be a professional or a pro at anything. I'm always learning every day. And of course, watching you today, I wanted to come. I had heard your name for years, and when you sent me the friend request a couple months ago on Facebook, I never even dreamed you probably knew who I was or anything, and I seen that as my opportunity to reach out to you, and I immediately sent you a message and everything. And I told you, I said I wanted to get together and do a video with you, because I sat here today, I wanted to do this video to promote you, but I also wanted to come and learn some stuff, and that's what I did. I learned some stuff from you today, and I think David did too. And but it's just you're a busy guy, you travel all the time, and I wanted to make it easy on you. Come right here in your backyard to do this, and I can't thank you enough for taking the time out on a Saturday to come out and me and you run some saws for a little bit and do some sawing and put, because you've got a heck of a following, but people in my world don't know who you are. They may have heard the name or something like that.
All the old guys did, but they're mostly all retired or gone now.
That's right. That's right. And
I was a young whippersnapper. They always told me, said, you'll never do much at this because you're not a logger, you're not an arborist, you're not a. I said, but I'm just a chainsaw operator. And you use both of those,
And that's the thing I want to point out. That you didn't come from any background, tree background, nothing along those lines. And I know you've probably caught a lot of flack over that over the years, but you're a guy that got it. I mean, you understood it.
Well, I learned from people like yourself, some of the best in the industry.
Yeah.
That you start thinking, as long as you're open-minded and you pick up stuff like that, you'll be able to use it at some point in time. It's like Soren used to say, experience is the best teacher you can get, but you got to remember there's two different kinds of experience.
Exactly.
Good ones and bad ones. So you want to learn the good ones on your own, the bad ones from somebody else.
Exactly. I've got a question here, and this comes from a tree guy. And he says, he's a very legit tree guy in the comments. He says, some people, and we're going to wrap this thing up with this, some people just like to complicate things more than they have to. Straight tree, why bother with all the extra steps? Even with a back or side leaner, notch it and wedge it over, straight back cut, heavy forward lean, bore cut it. And that comes from a tree guy right there. And so I would like for you, and he's talking about bore sawing, and that's of course of what I do. So I would like for you to just briefly respond to that for just a little bit right there, and say why. Respond to his question right there.
Well, and Soren used to say this: a chainsaw only cuts so fast. If you look at the dynamics of a chain working on a bar and turned by a power system, it can only clear chips so fast. Yeah, you can perfect those things in the design a little bit,
sure,
but it only cuts so fast. So as a chainsaw operator, whether you're felling a tree, bucking it up, or whatever, is when you start to look, if I've got to cut 20 inches of wood, and I've got to cut through a circumference of 20 inches of wood, it doesn't make any difference if I'm going this way or that way.
Correct.
Your plan has to be up here. If you know exactly what you're going to do with that saw, then basically you're going to cut just as fast no matter which direction you're going.
Right.
But now, look at the variables. If the tree is leaning forward, yeah, it's going to go from the back, right up to the hinge, walk away. If a tree has heavy forward lean, though, as you start to cut in, it could slab or barber chair with you. So if you have to wedge a tree, then basically you start from the back, you place a wedge. Large diameter is fine, but you start getting into those 16, 20-inch diameters, and then if you have especially any bad fiber or growth is different, high terrain, this kind of stuff, now you start to think about a bore cut can give you a spot to put a wedge, and if I start going in here and it's back lean, I have to drive, I have to get up to it, and it can sit back on my saw if I don't do that quick enough.
Sure.
So it's like a bore cut, I only know of one issue that might be slower, and that would be understanding the reactive forces of the bar tip. But if you pick up a chainsaw, you should understand that.
And you got a great point right there. If you got to cut 20 inches, you got to cut 20 inches of wood. It doesn't matter whether you're boring or you're cutting like this, or you're cutting like that. It's the same thing. But people have that in their mind that it's more to it. But what you just said, say a 16-inch tree, 15, 16-inch tree, if you cut your notch and you start cutting from the back coming into it to try to make your hinge, you don't hardly have enough room to stick a wedge in there yet, or you'll jam it right into your bar. And that's the beauty of bore cut.
And then when you get into quality work like logging or whatever, people tell me, oh, you can't leave that hinge on there. No
That's
reason
right.
to set that up first, because you can't cut it out. You can't cut it out. Well, if you cut it out, you've lost sometimes your direction and your control and your safety.
That's right.
And the other thing is that which would be better? If I can leave that hinge, that's less cutting to do, as long as I leave it the right dimension.
Right.
When I start from the back, if my hinge is this thick, I'm going to have separation.
That's right.
And you can look on the back of a log truck. Stump might look really great, the butt log, but now when you slice a little piece off of it, see if it doesn't fall apart.
Right.
That's where the pressures and the pulls and the fiber happen.
Correct.
And so if you get the hinge correct, you're not going to have the quality issues. You could go lower to the ground. We had a mill in Pennsylvania about years ago. We went into an area and the guy started using it. We started hearing repercussions from the mill. We go, bro, we can't do this. And Dan Hartrap at that time, he talked them into just take 2 loads and scale it out exact. And then take another 2 loads from another, and you scale it out exact, about the same weight and board feet. And they came back about a month later and they said, we want to get behind your training program. because at that point they were just match cutting everything off. They were pulling fibers and all this kind of stuff. They were cutting higher stumps, and basically when the guys started cutting them down to the ground using notches, open face, and hinges, bore cutting, they didn't have the splits and the pulls. They were using 14-inch trim, and it went down to 2. What does that tell you about the quality of the cutter?
Right.
So the mill wasn't losing much. They didn't have a pile of butt logs laying
A bone pile.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Tim, I appreciate you coming out and sharing with me a little bit. We're going back in time and talking about the history. And of course, I would imagine you said you're 64, about to be 64 now. You're probably getting close to ready to transition into the next phase or something probably here shortly, I'm sure.
Well, and, retirement's not in my vocabulary, but
gonna keep on going.
I hope to make chips another 10 years.
Another 10 years. Well, good deal, man. That'll be good. I'm sure. I can almost guarantee you we'll cross paths some more and everything. And I'm here to help you promote anything you need promoting. All you got to do, you got my phone numbers. Reach out and send me a message or call me or anything like that.
Like I said in the message, I would be honored.
Oh yeah, well I appreciate it. Yes sir, man. Appreciate you coming out. So to say that I'm happy with this video is kind of an understatement. Worked through it. It's taken me, been working on about 2.5 hours working through both cameras and just going through everything, listening to what he said and watching him, and just that was a great time last Saturday with Mr. Tim Ard there and doing all that. And I hope that y'all enjoyed the video. I know it's a long one. Sometimes you can't sit there and watch a long one all at one time. I'm the same way. I have to watch them, over the course of 3 or 4 days maybe to get them all going through and things like that. He has so much in his mind along the lines of chainsaws and just things that are processing. It's so cool to see how he has everything laid out. He's done it so many times. I mean, can you imagine 70,000 people plus that he's, trained and been around, and in the places that he's been and doing this and making a living doing it. And I mean, that's what has fed his family, and put a roof over his head, teaching people about chainsaws. So kind of the next step on this thing, and I want to get into this right here. We are working on putting together a training session with chainsaws here. And it's going to be a very dynamic training session. There is going to be, I will be there involved in it. Mr. Tim will be there involved in it. And David Breeden will be there involved in it. And we're all, each three, going to have our own special parts that we're going to do. And right now we are planning on doing it the middle of March. And I'll be talking about it more as time comes. We're in the beginning stages of planning it. We had a conference call the other night about it. And it's going to happen right there in or around Rome's, somewhere in that area. We're working on securing a location and where we can have classroom stuff. But it will be on a Friday, a Saturday, and a Sunday. So it'll be 3 solid days of chainsaws. So very accessible from the Atlanta area, because you're only you could actually fly into Hartsfield and you're probably an hour and a half, probably about depending on the traffic, hour and a half drive up to toward Cartersville or Rome. All that area up there is plenty of lodging right there. We'll work on that too. But I just wanted to shake the bushes a little bit, because you've got Tim sitting there with 40 years of experience, training experience. And then I'm sitting here with, mid 30 years of logging experience. And then you've got David from an industry standpoint, with Husqvarna, And so there's a lot to come to the table right there. So let me know down below what you think about that, and because we're gonna set it up and it's gonna happen. Of course, we'll have to see what the Corona stuff does and and kind of go by that right there. But that's kind of the game plan right now. It's kind of the looking at the big picture thing. So appreciate all y'all watching. Hope y'all have a wonderful weekend this weekend. And again, like I said in the video, a huge thanks to Mr. Tim Ard for agreeing to come meet me and share some of his knowledge with me and do this video with me. I think it's important that y'all hear some of the history and some of the background, you know, with chainsaws and some of the things that went on to kind of get to where we're at today. Because there are some chainsaw enthusiasts out there. I mean, they're all over the place. Guys and girls both that are not loggers or tree care people, they love chainsaws and they love messing with them, and that's kind of their hobby. And so we're going to offer this training in the municipalities. Anybody can get involved in it. So just comment down below and let me know what you think. Because we'll be coming forth with more information in January. We got to get past Christmas first, and then we'll do that. So we'll catch y'all later. Later, taters.